Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today on Bill C-217, an act to amend the Criminal Code regarding mischief in relation to a war memorial or cenotaph. This regards specifically mischief relating to war memorials to our veterans. This was proposed by a Conservative member, the member for Dufferin-Caledon. I think the goal of this is to respect the memory of veterans who fell in wars and missions in which Canada has taken part in the past decades and centuries. I'd like to say at the outset that I am proud of Canada's implication in the defense of peace and liberty. I'm very proud of our men and women in uniform who are serving Canada even today, and I'm proud of all those who served before them. Soon it will be Veterans Week, and we'll all have an opportunity to go and reflect and show our respect for fallen soldiers and those who were able to come home. Everyone agrees with that, I'm sure. But I'd like to get back to the bill itself. This bill seeks to amend the Criminal Code to add a clause about mischief in relation to war memorials. Of course, the Criminal Code already has penalties for this kind of mischief in a general way, including mischief against an asset such as a memorial, is already part and parcel of the Criminal Code. And I quote, "Everyone commits mischief who willfully is guilty of an indictable offense liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, is guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction." So there are already provisions that judges can apply from the Criminal Code. I talk about mischief in general, but that includes a memorial in honor of our veterans. Section 430 of the Criminal Code provides for heavier penalties for places of worship if it is established that the mischief was motivated by hate or by racism in general, as is the case for cultural property. Moreover, if an individual commits mischief that causes actual danger to life, he or she is liable to imprisonment for life. Bill C-17 seeks to amend Section 430 of the Criminal Code, the provision on mischief. It seeks to implement a minimum penalty or fine of $1,000 for a first sentence, a minimum sentence of 14 days in prison for a second offense, and a minimal sentence of 30 days in prison for every subsequent offense. This would be the case if it's mischief against a war memorial. As I said, the current provisions of Section 430 already deal with mischief regarding the destruction and degradation of an asset, and in general, the sentences and penalties provided give sufficient latitude to a judge to determine a sentence or penalty that is appropriate for the situation. In addition, the bill proposes that those found guilty of mischief in relation to a war memorial would have minimal sentences. That would remove discretion from our judges to determine what the situation is exactly, according to their discretion. Why did the person do this? I think that when you're talking about mischief in relation to a war memorial, there's one major factor that must be determined, and the judge has to have the leeway to act accordingly. That is, did this person commit this mischief on a war memorial willingly, knowing it was a monument to veterans, or simply commit mischief without even really knowing that this was a war memorial? I think that there's a major distinction that has to be made here. Because in order to make enlightened judgment, you have to know the intent behind such a gesture. I think that the member for Dufferin-Caledon tabled this bill to encourage people to respect our veterans more. I think that's the goal here. First of all, I don't think that Canadians lack respect toward their fellow citizens who've served or are serving in the Canadian Forces. And even less so regarding those who did not come home. In my riding, and I served in the military, I saw how many people take the trouble to go to Remembrance Day ceremonies. In some countries, maybe these traditions are lost, but I don't think that's the case in Canada. Secondly, I think that there are far more effective and concrete ways to pay tribute to our veterans. I hope that my colleague will agree with me. As I said, everyone should be in agreement with these principles. Another thing I think is important to point out is that in all these penalties imposed on people who commit mischief in relation to war memorials, none of them really force them to understand what being a veteran means. The people found guilty won't be constrained to volunteer in a legion, for instance, to understand the role these veterans played. They won't really be encouraged to understand what their service was for their country, what kind of work they did. So I think that if the goal of the bill is to encourage respect for our veterans, I don't think that imposing prison sentences is the way to go, nor are financial penalties. That won't make people really think about who our veterans are, what they did for us, what kind of people they are. I don't think that reaches the goal. And it will make people more interested in veterans. In addition, another thing that I find a little peculiar in this bill is, as I said, I have great respect for veterans. I served in the Canadian Armed Forces, so technically I'm a veteran too. What worries me will be categorizing the type of memorial or monument. We'll say a war memorial is a worse thing than a monument for women or a monument for Aboriginals. I don't think that's the right way to go. We will be categorizing monuments. Vandalizing one is more serious than vandalizing another with a more serious penalty. I don't think that's the right direction. I think the right direction is to indicate to judges that we in Parliament feel that when there are offenses against war memorials, that is profoundly unsettling. We hope that you will use your leeway to use the criminal code and adjust the penalty accordingly. I think that's a much more logical way of proceeding, rather than categorizing the monument and imposing penalties that aren't necessarily logical, because the intent has to be understood. Maybe the person was drunk and couldn't even distinguish between a tree and a monument. I don't think that would have the same impact of somebody who willingly and deliberately destroys a war memorial because they're against the armed forces, for instance. There has to be some nuance, an understanding of the intent behind such a gesture. The criminal code has all the latitude necessary to act. I think that judges are intelligent people who can do that, who have discernment and logic. They can look at intent. So that is why I oppose this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.